Let's talk about relationships between categorical variables. Once again, what is a categorical variable? A categorical variable is going to be something like, what animal do you own? What state were you born in? What's your favorite pizza topping? So if you're thinking of these things right here, you can think about the relationships between two categorical variables. Now notice I'm saying two here because we're not talking about univariate data anymore, as though we've asked one question. We're talking about bivariate data. Bivariate data. In bivariate data, we're asking two questions for bivariate and categorical in this instance, since this is what we'll be talking about. Now, what is a contingency table? It's kind of like a frequency table, but instead of it just being one-dimensional, it's two. Like, do you own a cat? Do you own a dog? Do you live on or off campus? And we'd go right here, and we could see the count of observations, like 4 people own a cat who live on campus, 1 person who owns a dog who lives on campus, let's say 2 people own cats who live off campus, and let's go, that's 5, so let's go 8 people own dogs. My favorite thing to talk about next is a mosaic plot, which I was thinking of I need to draw this here, because a mosaic plot is a great way to visualize two categorical variables. Down here on the bottom axis, we would have the percent of people who live on or off campus. So we'll put campus down here on the bottom. And with campus, you can see up here at the top, we have on campus was 5 people, and off campus was 10 people. That means we need to do a split right here where it would be 10 in this group and 5 in this group to make it properly sized. And this would be the off-campus group right here, and this would be the on-campus group right here with a 1-to-2 ratio. Next, we would go within the groups, and we would go the on-campus group right here has people owning cats much more than dogs, and we'd go here. This would be cat ownership, and this would be dog ownership. So now the off-campus group has way more dogs, and we'd go down here, and it'd be about the same spot because it's a, if you look at it, about 20% of people own cats on the off-campus, and we'll highlight that so you can see it. On the off-campus, 20% of people own cats, 2 out of 10, versus the on-campus, 4 out of 5. So the 4 out of the 5 people here. So in other words, we could put the numbers in 4, 1, 2, and then this would be 8 right there. And you could actually add up the numbers and see it. And usually you get some sort of coloring to help you better understand this, where this might be colored the green group, and over here you would have this, and you can see more people on campus own cats versus the dogs right here might have a smaller amount on campus and more off campus. These are my 2 favorite graphics for understanding and displaying two categorical variables. Now remember, these are bivariate displays because we have in them 2 questions asked. Do you own a cat or dog? 6 people own cats and 9 people own dogs out of the 15. Lots of these terms are going to be explained here on what we're saying and what this means. We draw some graphics to start to show how we can understand and display data. The ones I'm not a big fan of right here are in the middle, the side-by-side pie charts. It's just when you make pie charts and put them side by side. So you'd make 2 separate pie charts, one for on and off campus, and they'd look the same but with a different ratio. So you would see the one pie chart being the on campus would have the majority of people owning cats, and the one pie chart for the off campus would have the majority of people owning dogs. So side-by-side pie charts are another way to display 2 categorical variables, and you would just have your on-campus pie chart and your off-campus pie chart. Segmented bar charts right here, or stacked bar charts, are when you take your bar charts right here and you stack them such that we have an on-campus one and we have an off-campus one. So the on-campus bar chart right here would have more green and a tiny bit of pink, and then over here would be the reverse, and it would look like this. So you'd have more green right here, and then whoops, less green down here, and then you would do this. And that's stacked or segmented bar charts right there. We'll see these all more in depth, but notice how I'm just displaying the same data collected. Do you live on or off campus? And do you own a cat or dog? Which are 2 categorical questions right here. So the first thing we're talking about right here is contingency tables. Remember, a contingency table is like a frequency table, but with 2 variables. Frequency table, univariate. Contingency table, bivariate. So a contingency table for the Titanic would show us two variables. We have, did they survive, alive or dead? And what class were you in? So this is bivariate. To collect this data from individuals, you would have to ask two questions. Bivariate. Be careful because the cells make it look that it's quantitative. Now, we didn't get an answer of 679. It's that there were 679 people who were in the crew, one of the categorical variables, and they were also dead on the Titanic. Now, when you look at this right here, remember, every time we collected data, we had to look at someone on the Titanic and say, what class were they in? What was their survival? Two categorical variables were collected, and then the combination of that gets you to a cell, which tells you the amount of people who answered both questions in a certain way. Now we have the marginal displays. This is one of the easiest things to memorize for a definition. The marginal display is the display in the margin. Now think, if this is one of the margins, where would the other margin be? Here's one of the margins, the ends of the table. So where would the other margin be? On the bottom. Now a marginal display only displays one variable. So it's kind of like a frequency table again, which is just a univariate display. And it's on the contingency table. So a contingency table has margins which show you the distribution of one of the variables. And you can see the distribution of the other variable in the other margin. Contingency tables have two margins showing a univariate display, in this instance, of the survival of people on the Titanic and also the class of people on the Titanic. Next, we have conditional distributions. And a conditional distribution always starts out with a thing like, given this is true, like setting a condition, what is the distribution of this? So it looks within one variable at the distribution of another variable. So when you see this right here, given someone was in the crew, and there's other ways of phrasing it, like for the people who were in the crew, what about people in the crew? What was their survival? Notice how it's narrowing down within one variable to look at the distribution of another. I can't promise the way it'll always be phrased, but you'll always have to think I'm looking within one of the variables at one of the levels, and these are the levels right here. The levels of class are those. So you'd go within one of them and look at the distribution of the other. And that is going to be a conditional distribution. How about, given someone survived the Titanic, what class were they in? Notice how we're going within just one of them and then looking at the distribution of the other variable. How about, given someone died on the Titanic, what class were they in? Lots of ways to do conditional distributions. Now, this brings us to an important idea. When data is independent, the conditional distributions will mostly match up. One of my favorite examples of this is asking students, which test would you rather take? I have here test A. Let's say test A is a unique test that I only give to a subset of students. And I have here test B. And then we look at the pass rate of test A. There's the pass rate. There's the pass rate of test B. I'll highlight it here so you can kind of understand this is within test B, the people who pass, conditional. And within test A, here's the people who pass. You'd probably say, Brian, this is unfair because within test A, they're more likely to pass rather than test B. Also, the margin is at the bottom of this, showing you more people got test B than test A. We can add a marginal distribution over here, which would show us about, on average, the pass rate across all the tests. So notice how we now have marginal displays in the margin, right over here. There's a margin, there's a margin. And then within this table, we'll do a different color right here, we have conditional. Given someone took test A, what was their pass rate? Given someone took test B, what was their pass rate? Since the conditional distributions do not match up, we would say that these are not independent. We would say that there is an association. So this is where they are not independent, they are associated. They are more independent if you saw a pass-fail rate of my tests, if it looked more like this right here. It doesn't have to look perfectly like this. It could look something like this, and that would look more independent because now the people who take test A on the left right here versus the people who take test B, the pass rate fail would be about equal, and it really wouldn't make much of a difference on if someone's going to pass or fail the test, whether they took version A or version B. So you passing or failing the test is independent of the version you took over here in example 2, versus passing and failing the test would be more dependent of the test you took in example 1, or associated or not independent. Notice how there's a lot of synonymous words here to understand truly what this means. Independent means it wouldn't matter. Knowing which test you took wouldn't matter and wouldn't help us predict better if you're going to pass or fail. Where when we say not independent, we're saying you passing or failing is associated or has a relationship to which test you take, because knowing which test someone took, if they took test A, we'd think they're more likely to pass versus test B, and knowing that associated means not independent is key for our class. How about displaying contingency tables, which we've already done right there? Inside of JUMP, we can go to Analyze Fit Y by X. Now, why are we doing Fit Y by X? We're doing it because it's bivariate data, X and Y. So we have here survival is one of the variables, the one we're interested in, the Y variable of interest, and class is the X variable. So when you think about this, does somebody's class on the Titanic explain why they survived? That's a great way of phrasing it to make sure you put the X, the explanatory variable. Does class explain why somebody survived? The Y is what we're interested in. Here is the contingency table. You can go to the red arrow to change what is being displayed. Usually we display the counts and row percentages, which the row percentages are going to be given somebody is alive, the percent that were in crew, and all these numbers across, and it will add up to 100% if you were to go across here. You can also do column percentages or other things, and we will use this later on for the chi-squared test of independence. Side-by-side pie charts, not the biggest fan of. Once again, this is the same data, it's just different ways of displaying it, and it's just pie charts side by side. We can use this once again to figure out if something is associated or not independent. The bigger differences we see within these groups, the more of an association we see. Is your crew associated with what class with your survival on the Titanic? Your class on the Titanic associated with your survival? Notice how there's more crew in the dead, there's less crew in the alive. This looks like evidence that crew or your class is associated with whether you lived or died. The bigger the gaps between these, the stronger the association. So we look for this a lot of times between the conditional distributions to see what's going on. Now this is really complicated. I don't like looking at things like this right here. It's too much. I want to look at a mosaic plot. A mosaic plot is probably the best way to visualize two categorical variables. Mosaic plot to see the visualization, contingency table to see the numbers. Two categorical variables are entered in, and we get from it a mosaic plot. Notice somebody's survival looks to be associated with class. Looking within this, you can see the dead is more comprised of the crew on the Titanic, where people who survived were more likely to be in first class. And these big gaps right here between the conditional distributions are where we see the differences. Now, one thing we can do is we can flip the X and the Y, and you'll notice right here, what about this now? Well, you see more gaps. And we will now flip the X and the Y. Here we go. I want to flip the X and the Y, where you can see somebody's class. You go down here to first class, there's a lot more alive. So look at as you go to the first, second, third, you go up in class, third to first, second to first, you're going to see more survival than you would down in the crew. Once again, the bigger these gaps right here, the more differences there are in the conditional distributions. The larger the differences in the conditional distributions, the more evidence of an association. We do have ways to test this with p-values. We'll be talking about that later, but right now we're just visually inspecting it. So what about if we had data where people are sitting in class? So we have gender and what part of the room did you sit in? Does this look weaker or stronger in association to the data from the Titanic? So once again, we're going to look at the gaps, and there is a kind of a gap right here. So there might be some sort of moderate association, but it doesn't look quite as strong as the Titanic data when you look at gender, which we have right here at coded. Once again, it is still categorical. Female is 0 and male is 1. And then we have the positions of where they sat, near the front, around the middle, near the back. Remember, just because something is coded as numbers doesn't mean it's quantitative. It's not a quantity of your gender or a quantity of where you sit. It's just been coded into numbers, and then we can do a contingency table of it to see the counts of the observations, as in 19 females sat near the front, whereas 15 males sat near the front. Looks like this is where the biggest differences are, and I think that is around the middle. Just looked at the key right there. So 26 females sat around the middle, where 18 males sat around the middle. So there are some differences to be seen in the data set. There are slightly more females than males in this data set, as can be seen down here on the marginal distribution. It's very hard to see. You probably have to look at the contingency table and look at the margin over here to see 52 females were in this data set, whereas 48 males were in this data set. It's a little easier to see that group 2 with 44 individuals is the largest of the groups, and that can be seen over here in this marginal display. Remember, the margins are on the outside showing one variable, and you can look at the distribution of that one variable by seeing the widths of the margins. The conditional is going to be on the inside, showing you within females or within males right here, the percent of individuals who sat in certain locations to see if there's an association or not an association. The stronger the association, the more differences there are in the conditional distributions. Which of these would be the stronger association right here? Plot 1 on the left or plot 2? The strong association right here is plot 1, where your test is more strongly associated with passing and failing, where on the right, plot 2 has a weak or non-existent association. Now, once again, when is it strong, when is it weak? It's going to be how big the gaps are. So you'd have right here non-existent, weak, moderate, strong, super strong, and those are just subjective words. We can actually come up with quantitative values to analyze this in p-values to see if it is statistically significant later. But right now, we're just visually looking at it and understanding what a conditional distribution is within the bars on a mosaic plot or within the table on a contingency table. And we're also understanding what a marginal distribution is. Keep up the good work and let me know if you have any questions.